Did you know that in 2024, global shipping costs skyrocketed by 47% in just 6 months? Not because of fuel prices or labor shortages, but because pirates, terrorists, and cybercriminals turned the world's oceans into a high-stakes battleground? Right now, as you're reading this, there's a cargo ship somewhere in the Red Sea making a life or death decision. Pay a ransom, reroute 6,000 miles around Africa, or risk an attack that could cost millions. This isn't some distant problem affecting only massive corporations. Every single product you've ordered online in the past year has been touched by this crisis. Your phone, your clothes, your coffee. Everything has traveled through waters that are now considered war zones. But here's what nobody's talking about. This security crisis isn't just changing how much we pay for shipping. It's fundamentally reshaping global trade, national economies, and the way we'll live our lives for decades to come. Why are criminal organizations suddenly so interested in cargo ships? What makes these routes so vulnerable? And most importantly, how did we let our entire global economy become so fragile that a few attacks in strategic waterways could send shockwaves through every store, every warehouse, every doorstep delivery in the world? Let's dive in and explore now. Mini-hook, what if I told you that 3 separate crises converged at exactly the same moment to create the most expensive shipping disaster in modern history? The story begins in late 2023, and honestly, I remember thinking at the time that things couldn't possibly get worse for global shipping. We'd just recovered from the COVID-19 supply chain nightmare, and companies were finally catching their breath. But then something unprecedented happened. 3 major security threats emerged simultaneously across the world's most critical shipping routes. First, you had the Houthi rebels in Yemen launching drone and missile attacks on commercial vessels in the Red Sea, a waterway that handles 12% of all global trade. Second, Somali piracy resurged with a vengeance after years of relative quiet, with sophisticated new tactics that made the old guys in speedboats look like amateurs. Third, and this is the one that really keeps me up at night, state-sponsored cyber attacks began targeting shipping company logistics systems, creating chaos without firing a single bullet. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like in practice. Imagine you're the captain of a container ship worth $200 million carrying cargo valued at another $500 million. You're approaching the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the narrow passage between Yemen and Djibouti. Your company's insurance just tripled because of the security situation. Your radar picks up 3 fast-moving vessels approaching from Yemen's coast. You have maybe 15 minutes to make a decision. Do you call for military escort, which might not arrive in time? Do you speed up and hope you can outrun them, risking mechanical failure? Do you try to negotiate if they're pirates or run if they're terrorists? In my opinion, this is where the human cost of this crisis becomes real. These aren't just statistics or economic figures. These are real people making split-second decisions that could mean life or death for their crew. Mini-hook, one specific attack changed everything about how the shipping industry calculates risk. And it happened on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. The Houthi attacks in the Red Sea aren't random acts of violence. They're a calculated strategy to disrupt Western trade and gain political leverage. And frankly, it's working brilliantly from their perspective. In November 2023, the Houthis seized the Galaxy Leader, a vehicle carrier, and it's still held captive as I'm telling you this story. But the real game changer came in December when they started using Iranian-supplied drones and missiles with shocking accuracy. Here's what makes this situation so unique. The Red Sea route saves shipping companies approximately 10-14 days of travel time compared to going around Africa. That's 2 weeks of fuel, 2 weeks of crew wages, 2 weeks of delayed inventory. For a single large container ship, that's about $1 million in extra costs per voyage. Now multiply that by the 19,000 ships that normally transit through the Suez Canal each year. We're talking about billions of dollars in additional costs that ultimately get passed down to consumers. Major shipping companies like Maersk, MSC, and Hapag-Lloyd made the unprecedented decision to completely avoid the Red Sea. Think about that for a moment. These companies abandoned one of the world's most important trade routes entirely, not because of storms or mechanical failures, but because the security risk became uninsurable. I remember reading the first announcement and thinking, this can't be sustainable. But here we are, over a year later, and the rerouting has become the new normal. The ripple effects are staggering. European ports saw delays of 2 to 3 weeks for Asian goods. Small businesses that rely on just-in-time inventory found themselves scrambling. And consumers? Well, we're paying an average of 15-20% more for imported goods without even realizing it. Mini-hook. While everyone was watching the physical attacks in the Red Sea, a silent digital war was crippling shipping companies from the inside out, and most people still don't know what's happening. This is the part of the story that genuinely terrifies me because it's so invisible. You can see a pirate attack or a missile strike, but cyber warfare happens in the shadows. In early 2024, several major shipping companies experienced what they called IT disruptions. That's corporate speak for we got hacked and our entire logistics system went down. I'm talking about companies that move millions of containers globally, suddenly unable to track cargo, process bookings, or communicate with ports. One particularly devastating attack on a European logistics giant locked them out of their systems for over 2 weeks. Ships were literally sitting in ports with cargo that couldn't be unloaded because the digital paperwork system was frozen. The hackers weren't asking for Bitcoin ransoms like typical cyber criminals. No, this was more sophisticated. It appeared to be state-sponsored actors testing vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. What makes shipping companies such attractive targets? Well, think about it. They're managing incredibly complex global networks, often with legacy systems that haven't been updated in years. A single shipping company might coordinate with thousands of ports, customs agencies, trucking companies, and warehouses. One breach can cascade through the entire supply chain like dominoes falling. And here's my personal take on this. We've built a global economy that's incredibly efficient but catastrophically fragile. We optimized for speed and cost cutting but forgot to build in resilience and redundancy. Now we're paying the price, literally. Mini hook. Just when experts declared the golden age of piracy dead and buried, Somali pirates returned with tactics so advanced they make Hollywood movies look outdated. Remember when Somali piracy was headline news around 2008 to 2012? Then it seemed to just disappear. Naval patrols, armed guards on ships, and international cooperation drove piracy incidents down to nearly zero. We all thought the problem was solved. We were wrong. In 2023-2024, Somali piracy came roaring back, but with a terrifying evolution. These aren't desperate fishermen in small boats anymore. Modern pirate organizations operate like sophisticated criminal enterprises with military-grade equipment. They're using drones for reconnaissance, satellite phones for coordination, and even leveraging legitimate maritime traffic patterns to hide their approach. One incident that really opened my eyes happened off the coast of Somalia in March 2024. Pirates used a hijacked fishing vessel as a mothership to extend their range hundreds of miles offshore, far beyond where naval patrols typically operate. They captured a bulk carrier transporting grain, held the crew hostage, and negotiated a ransom, while the ship continued sailing on autopilot to avoid detection. The entire operation lasted 72 hours before payment was made. The shipping company paid an estimated $5 million ransom and never publicly acknowledged it happened. Why the secrecy? Because admitting you paid ransoms encourages more attacks, but not paying means your crew might die. It's an impossible moral calculation, and honestly, I don't envy anyone who has to make that choice. The insurance industry responded by creating high-risk zones with premium increases of 300-500%. For a single voyage through these waters, insurance can cost $100,000, $150,000 extra. Small shipping companies simply can't afford it, so they're being squeezed out of certain routes entirely. This consolidates power in the hands of megacorporations that can absorb these costs, which reduces competition and ultimately raises prices for everyone. Mini hook. Here's where the story gets really interesting, because the impact of shipping insecurity doesn't stop at the waterline. It crashes onto shore and floods through entire economies in ways nobody predicted. Let me walk you through how a security incident in the Indian Ocean ends up affecting your grocery bill in ways you'd never expect. Start with the direct costs: rerouting, insurance, security personnel, fuel. Those immediately get baked into shipping rates. Container shipping costs from Asia to Europe that were $2,000 per container in 2019 spiked to over $10,000 by late 2024. Some routes even hit $15,000. But that's just the beginning. Longer shipping times mean companies need to hold more inventory as buffer stock. More inventory requires more warehouse space. More warehouse space means higher real estate costs and more working capital tied up. Suddenly, a company that could operate lean is forced to keep an extra month's worth of inventory just in case. I've seen small businesses go bankrupt because they couldn't afford to tie up that much capital. Then you've got the timing disruptions. Seasonal goods that need to arrive for specific holidays or weather conditions now have massive uncertainty built in. Retailers are ordering earlier and earlier, which means they're taking on more risk that consumer preferences might change. Fashion retailers are particularly vulnerable. Imagine ordering winter coats in June because you can't trust September delivery anymore. If you guess wrong on trends, you're stuck with unsellable inventory. My personal observation is that this crisis is accelerating two major trends: nearshoring and deglobalization. Companies are realizing that ultra-long supply chains from Asia might be cheap in normal times, but catastrophically expensive during disruptions. We're seeing manufacturing move to Mexico, Eastern Europe, and North Africa, closer to end markets. This is a fundamental rewiring of the global economy that will take decades to fully play out. Mini hook. Behind every shipping statistic is a human being whose life has been turned upside down, and some of these stories will break your heart. Let me tell you about Captain Rodriguez, a Filipino merchant marine officer I read about in a maritime journal. He's been sailing for 22 years, supporting a family back home with his wages. In 2024, his ship was attacked in the Gulf of Aden. Missiles hit the water nearby, close enough to drench the deck with the impact spray. The crew spent 4 hours in the secure room, not knowing if they'd survive. They did survive, but Captain Rodriguez told an interviewer he can't sleep anymore. Every sound on the ship makes him jump. He's developed anxiety so severe he's considering leaving the sea entirely, which means losing the income that supports his children's education. Multiply that story by thousands of merchant mariners who are now suffering from PTSD, and you start to see the human cost. The shipping industry already struggles to recruit and retain qualified crew members. When sailing becomes not just hard work but genuinely life-threatening, fewer people want to do it. This creates labor shortages, which drives up wages, which increases shipping costs further. And here's something that really bothers me personally. These crew members are essentially civilians caught in geopolitical conflicts they have no part in. They're not soldiers. They're workers just trying to make a living. Yet they're on the front lines of these security threats with minimal protection. The emotional toll extends to their families too. Imagine being married to someone who's at sea for months at a time, and now you're reading news reports about attacks in the exact region where their ship is heading. The psychological stress is immense. Some crew members have reported that the hardest part isn't the actual danger, it's the waiting and uncertainty. Is today the day something happens? Will that radar blip turn out to be nothing, or is it a threat? The constant state of alert is exhausting. Mini hook. There's a little-known clause in shipping insurance that could trigger a global trade collapse, and most people have no idea it exists. Let's talk about something that sounds boring but is actually fascinating. Marine insurance. Specifically, something called war risk insurance. Standard marine insurance covers typical maritime risks: storms, accidents, mechanical failures. But attacks by missiles, pirates, or terrorists? That requires separate war risk coverage. And here's the kicker. War risk insurance can be canceled with just 7 days' notice. 7 days. Imagine you're a shipping company with vessels worth billions of dollars sailing through contested waters. Your insurance company calls and says, "We're pulling your coverage in a week." You have no time to reroute, you can't sail uninsured, and alternative insurers are either unavailable or charging astronomical rates. This happened multiple times in 2024, creating absolute panic in the shipping industry. Some insurers simply stopped offering coverage for certain routes altogether. The insurance market for high-risk zones contracted so dramatically that the few remaining insurers could name their price. It's a seller's market in the extreme. One maritime insurance executive I read about described it as insuring a house that's already on fire. The actuarial models that insurance companies use to price risk completely broke down because the security situation was changing faster than they could update their calculations. In my opinion, this exposes a critical flaw in how we've structured global trade. We've privatized the risk assessment, but socialized the consequences. When insurance becomes unaffordable, shipping doesn't stop. It just becomes uninsured or underinsured, which means when disasters happen, governments end up footing the bill for bailouts and economic stabilization. The proposed solutions range from government-backed insurance pools to international naval convoys, but coordinating that level of international cooperation? Good luck. Every nation wants the benefits of secure shipping lanes, but nobody wants to pay the full cost of protecting them. Mini hook. While the threats have evolved dramatically, the solutions being developed sound like something straight out of a science fiction novel, and some are already being deployed. The maritime security industry has exploded with innovation in response to these threats. Some of it is genuinely impressive, some of it is questionable, and some of it is downright scary. Let's start with the defensive technologies. Modern cargo ships can now be equipped with long-range acoustic devices, essentially sound cannons that can incapacitate attackers at a distance. They're non-lethal but effective at deterring pirate boarding attempts. Laser dazzlers that temporarily blind hostile forces without permanent damage are being tested on several routes. Then you've got physical barriers: electrified fencing, razor wire, foam barriers that make decks impossible to climb. Ships are being turned into fortresses. But here's where it gets really interesting. Autonomous drone systems. Some shipping companies are deploying small defensive drones that can patrol around a vessel, identify threats, and even deliver non-lethal countermeasures. Picture a cargo ship with its own aerial defense swarm. It sounds crazy, but it's happening. On the cybersecurity front, shipping companies are finally modernizing their IT infrastructure. Blockchain-based tracking systems that are much harder to hack. AI-powered threat detection that can identify unusual patterns in network traffic. Redundant systems that can operate independently if the main network goes down. The investment required is massive. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars for large shipping companies. But after the attacks of 2024, it's become a survival necessity rather than a luxury. What fascinates me personally is how quickly the industry adapted once the threat became undeniable. For years, shipping companies resisted technology upgrades because of the cost. Now they're racing to implement solutions that would have seemed excessive just 2 years ago. However, there's a darker side to this technological arms race. As defenses improve, attackers evolve their tactics. It's creating an escalation cycle where both sides are constantly trying to outpace each other. Mini hook. What if these shipping attacks aren't random violence at all, but carefully orchestrated moves in a global power struggle most people don't even realize is happening? This is where the story gets deeply complex and, frankly, a bit disturbing. The shipping security crisis isn't occurring in a vacuum. It's intimately connected to larger geopolitical conflicts. The Houthi attacks in the Red Sea are backed by Iran as part of their proxy war against Western interests. The timing of the piracy resurgence coincides with weakening of international naval presence due to budget cuts and force redeployment. Some analysts suggest, and I find this compelling, that certain state actors are deliberately destabilizing shipping routes to test Western response capabilities and economic resilience. It's warfare without declarations, combat without uniforms. China's Belt and Road Initiative suddenly looks more strategic when maritime routes become unreliable. Overland shipping corridors through Central Asia gain appeal despite higher costs. Russia's Arctic shipping routes, previously considered too expensive and risky, are now being reconsidered as alternatives. The entire geography of global trade is being redrawn based on security considerations. Let me share my personal perspective on this. I think we're witnessing the early stages of a fundamental shift in how nations project power. Traditional military strength mattered when conflicts were fought with armies and navies. But in the 21st century, disrupting economic networks might be more effective than winning battles. Why invade a country when you can strangle its trade routes? Why bomb factories when you can hack logistics systems? The cost-benefit ratio for asymmetric economic warfare is incredibly favorable for smaller actors who can't compete militarily with major powers. This makes the shipping security crisis not just an economic problem, but a national security issue for every country dependent on global trade, which is basically every country. The international response has been fragmented and inadequate, in my view. Naval task forces patrol some areas but lack the resources to cover all high-risk zones simultaneously. International cooperation is limited by competing national interests and historical tensions. Meanwhile, the criminals and terrorists exploiting these gaps are becoming more sophisticated and better funded with each successful attack. Mini hook. If you think the shipping situation is chaotic now, wait until you hear what experts predict for the next decade, and why some of it seems almost inevitable. Looking forward, the maritime security landscape appears headed for significant transformation. Several trends seem almost certain to continue and intensify. First, expect continued fragmentation of global supply chains. The era of ultra-long supply chains optimized purely for cost efficiency is ending. Companies will increasingly prioritize security and reliability over marginal cost savings. This means more regional production hubs, more redundancy, more inventory buffers. Second, automation and unmanned vessels will accelerate. If human crews face increasing danger, the logical response is to remove humans from the most vulnerable positions. Remotely operated or fully autonomous cargo ships eliminate the hostage scenario that makes piracy profitable. Several companies are already testing autonomous vessels, and I expect widespread adoption within 10-15 years. Third, the insurance and financing models for shipping will undergo fundamental restructuring. The traditional approaches simply don't work in the current risk environment. We'll likely see government-backed insurance schemes, international risk pooling arrangements, or entirely new financial instruments. Fourth, and this is controversial, I believe we'll see increasing militarization of commercial shipping. Not just defensive measures, but potentially armed personnel, military escorts becoming standard, and closer integration between commercial and naval operations. Some people find this troubling from a humanitarian and legal perspective. I understand those concerns, but I also see the practical necessity if the security situation doesn't improve. The economic implications are profound. Higher shipping costs mean higher consumer prices, which affects inflation and central bank policy. Reduced trade efficiency means lower economic growth globally. Countries that can secure their trade routes gain competitive advantages over those that can't. Inequality between nations may increase as a result. On a more optimistic note, this crisis might finally force the international community to take maritime security seriously. We might see renewed cooperation on naval patrols, information sharing, and legal frameworks for prosecuting maritime criminals. Crisis often drives innovation and collaboration. Let's hope that proves true here. Conclusion. So, let's recap what we've covered in this deep dive into the shipping security crisis. We started with the shocking statistic that shipping costs jumped 47% due to security threats, an increase that touches every product in your life. We explored the three converging crises: Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, resurgent Somali piracy, and sophisticated cyber warfare against shipping infrastructure. We examined the human cost through stories of merchant mariners living with constant danger and psychological trauma. We unpacked the insurance crisis that threatens to make certain routes completely uninsurable, potentially collapsing entire trade networks. We looked at technological responses ranging from sound cannons to autonomous defensive drones, and how the industry is racing to adapt. We considered the geopolitical dimensions, how shipping attacks are part of larger power struggles reshaping global order, and we peered into the future, where supply chains fragment, ships operate without crews, and maritime commerce operates under fundamentally different rules. The key takeaway is this: the shipping security crisis isn't just about higher prices at the store. It's a fundamental challenge to the globalized economic system we've built over the past 50 years. Every assumption about free flow of goods across oceans is being tested. So what can you do with this information? First, be a more informed consumer. When you see price increases, understand the complex factors driving them. It's not just corporate greed. Second, if you run a business dependent on international shipping, start building resilience now. Diversify suppliers, increase inventory buffers, explore nearshoring options. Don't wait for the next crisis to force your hand. Third, advocate for smarter policy responses. Maritime security requires international cooperation and sustained investment. Support leaders who understand these issues and are willing to address them seriously. Fourth, pay attention to the human element. The merchant mariners keeping global trade moving deserve our respect and support. They're taking real risks so we can have the products and lifestyle we take for granted. Finally, recognize that we're living through a pivotal moment in economic history. The decisions made in the next few years about maritime security will shape global trade for generations. This is the time to engage, learn, and contribute to solutions. I want to hear your thoughts on this. Have you noticed shipping delays or price increases in your own life? Do you think the international community can effectively cooperate on maritime security, or are we headed for further fragmentation? What solutions do you think might work that we haven't discussed? Drop your comments below. I read every single one and often feature the most insightful perspectives in future content. If you found this analysis valuable, hit that like button and share it with anyone who needs to understand what's really happening with global shipping. And definitely subscribe so you don't miss future deep dives into the forces shaping our world. The shipping security crisis is just beginning, and this story will continue evolving in ways we can't fully predict. But by understanding the dynamics at play, we can at least navigate the uncertainty with eyes open. Thanks for taking this journey with me into one of the most important yet underreported crises of our time. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember that every product you touch has a story of incredible complexity behind it.